I used to believe that love was the ultimate truth until I saw my ex-husband's face drain of color at the sight of my current one. Just a chance encounter in the produce section, 10 years after Nash vanished from my life. But that look of raw terror, followed by a text message that simply read, "Run. Trust me," shattered the peaceful life I'd carefully rebuilt. 3 years of marriage to Rowan Quinn, his gentle hands, his quiet support, his unwavering presence, all called into question by two desperate words from a man who once broke me. I told myself Nash was unstable, paranoid, bitter. But as I lay awake that night watching my husband sleep, I couldn't stop wondering, what does a man who specialized in uncovering secrets know about the stranger sharing my bed? And why was he willing to resurface after a decade of silence to warn me? I was about to discover that the most dangerous lies aren't the ones others tell us. They're the ones we tell ourselves when we choose comfort over truth. The morning light filtered through the windows of our small Vermont home, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. I stretched lazily in bed, savoring the quiet moment before the day began in earnest. Beside me, Rowan slept peacefully, his breathing deep and even. I studied his face, the sharp jawline, the slight furrow between his brows even in sleep, the dark hair that fell across his forehead. After 3 years of marriage, I still found myself marveling at how our paths had crossed. I'm Alara Quinn, 38 years old, and for the first time in a decade, I feel like I'm finally in a peaceful phase of life. After years of emotional turbulence and uncertainty, I've found stability with Rowan, a man whose quiet strength and unwavering support helped me rebuild after my disastrous first marriage. Our small town in Vermont has become my sanctuary. Last year, I opened an art cafe called Canvas and Cup, where locals display their artwork while enjoying artisanal coffee. It's not a fortune maker, but it's mine, something I created from nothing, just as I've recreated myself since my divorce. "Morning," Rowan mumbled, his voice thick with sleep as he opened one eye. "What time is it?" "Just after 7," I replied, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "I was thinking we could hit the farmer's market before grocery shopping. I need fresh flowers for the cafe." He nodded, reaching up to tuck a strand of my auburn hair behind my ear. "Whatever you want. I'm all yours today." That was Rowan, accommodating, supportive, present. Everything my ex-husband Nash had not been. Where Nash had been volatile and distant, Rowan was steady and engaged. Where Nash had disappeared for days at a time for work, Rowan always came home when he said he would. 2 hours later, we wandered through the produce section of Harmon's Market, the largest grocery store in our town. Rowan pushed the cart while I debated between two different brands of organic flour for the cafe's pastries. "Get both," he suggested with a shrug. "Test them out, see which one works better for your scones." I smiled at him, grateful for his practical nature. "You're right. We can do a taste test with the regulars." We continued through the store, filling our cart with the week's essentials. As we approached the checkout, I realized I'd forgotten to grab coffee filters. "I'll be right back," I told Rowan, who was already unloading our items onto the conveyor belt. As I turned toward the coffee aisle, my eye caught on a figure standing by the flower display. Tall, lean, with sandy blonde hair now streaked with gray at the temples. Even from behind, I recognized him immediately, though it had been 10 years since I'd seen him last. Nash Kingsley, my ex-husband. My heart stuttered in my chest. What was he doing here? Last I'd heard, he'd moved to Chicago after our divorce. He'd never mentioned any connection to Vermont. I stood frozen, watching as he examined a bouquet of deep red roses. He looked older, of course. His shoulders seemed more stooped than I remembered, and even from a distance, I could see the lines etched around his eyes when he turned slightly. Before I could think better of it, I approached him. "Nash? Wow, long time." He turned at the sound of my voice, and the change in his expression was immediate and shocking. His face, already pale, drained of all remaining color. His eyes widened, not with the surprise of running into an ex, but with something that looked alarmingly like fear. "Alara," he whispered, my name barely audible. Then his eyes shifted, looking past me. I glanced back to see Rowan approaching, a questioning look on his face. What happened next burned itself into my memory. Nash physically stumbled backward, as if he'd been struck. The roses he'd been holding fell from his grasp, scattering across the floor in a splash of crimson. Without another word, not even a goodbye, he turned and fled, nearly running toward the exit. I stood there, surrounded by fallen flowers, utterly bewildered.
"Who was that?"
Rowan asked, coming to stand beside me. I hesitated, unsure how to explain. "An old friend," I lied. "I think I startled him." Rowan raised an eyebrow but didn't press. He helped me gather the dropped roses, handing them to a nearby employee with an apologetic smile. We finished our shopping in relative silence, my mind racing with questions. What had caused such a dramatic reaction? Nash had looked at Rowan like he'd seen a ghost. Or a monster. As we loaded the groceries into our car, my phone buzzed with a text notification. Unknown number. I opened it, and my blood turned to ice.
"Run."
"Trust me."
I knew instantly it was from Nash.
With shaking fingers, I tried calling the number, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again, same result. When I attempted to text back, the message wouldn't deliver. He'd blocked me. "Everything okay?" Rowan asked, watching me from the driver's seat. I forced a smile.
"Fine."
"Just the cafe. A supplier mix-up." That night, as Rowan slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The encounter replayed in my mind on endless loop. Nash's face draining of color, the roses scattering, his hasty exit. And that text. 2 words that had shattered my sense of security.
"Run."
Trust me. Run from what? From whom? From Rowan? The idea seemed absurd. My gentle, supportive husband who surprised me with my favorite pastries and listened patiently when I talked about color theory and brush techniques. But I couldn't shake the image of Nash's face. Pure terror. Nash, who had worked for an intelligence firm before our marriage fell apart. Nash, who had always been paranoid, who had told me more than once. Not everyone's who they say they are. I turned to look at Rowan's sleeping form. In the dim light, his features seemed different somehow, sharper, harder. I shivered and turned away.
Sleep didn't come that night.
The next morning, I moved through my routine in a fog. As I prepared breakfast, my mind kept circling back to Nash's warning. What could he possibly know about Rowan that would warrant such an extreme message? "You seem distracted," Rowan commented, watching me over the rim of his coffee mug. "Everything okay with the cafe?" I plastered on a smile. "Just planning the new launch event. There's so much to coordinate." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. "Let me know if you need help. I can take some time off work." "That's sweet, but I've got it under control." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. After Rowan left for work, he consulted for logistics firms, often remotely. I sat down at my laptop and typed Nash's name into the search bar. Nothing relevant came up. No social media profiles, no professional pages, not even old photos or mentions in articles. It was as if he'd been erased from the digital world. This wasn't entirely surprising. Nash had always been private, bordering on secretive. During our 5-year marriage, he'd worked for a private intelligence firm, though he rarely discussed the details of his job. "The less you know, the safer you are," he'd say with a wry smile that never quite reached his eyes. One particular conversation surfaced in my memory. We'd been at a dinner party and someone had asked what Nash did for a living. "I help companies protect their interests," he'd replied vaguely. Later, when I'd pressed him for details, he'd looked at me with unusual intensity. "Not everyone's who they say they are, Alara. Remember that." At the time, I dismissed it as melodramatic. Now, I wasn't so sure. I spent the morning at the cafe, going through the motions of serving customers and arranging displays, but my mind was elsewhere. When there was a lull in business, I retreated to my small office and continued my fruitless search for information about Nash. Over the next few days, I found myself watching Rowan with new eyes, noting small habits I'd previously overlooked. He always kept his phone with him, even taking it to the bathroom. At the end of each day, he deleted all his text messages. I'd noticed when I'd borrowed his phone once, when mine was charging. He never spoke about his family beyond saying they weren't close, and in 3 years, I'd never met a single person from his past. These observations didn't necessarily mean anything sinister, I told myself. Many people were private about their digital footprint. Many had complicated family dynamics they preferred not to discuss. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing. Thursday evening brought my monthly book club dinner. 6 of us gathered at Leslie's house, a Victorian charmer on the outskirts of town. Rowan dropped me off, kissing me goodbye with a "have fun. Don't drink too much wine." As we discussed the latest literary thriller, the conversation drifted to our partners. "Tom's family is visiting next month," groaned Melissa. "His mother still rearranges my kitchen cabinets every time." "Count yourself lucky," said Heather. "My in-laws live 20 minutes away." "What about you, Alara?" Leslie asked. "Will Rowan's family ever visit Vermont?" I took a sip of wine. "Probably not. They're not close." "That's what he always says," Stephanie remarked. "But he never explains why. I've asked him directly at least twice." "He's good at deflecting," agreed Leslie. "Very charming about it, but he never actually answers." I hadn't realized my friends had noticed this pattern too. It made me uneasy. "Well, family can be complicated," I said, eager to change the subject. Later that night, as Rowan and I prepared for bed, I found myself thinking about my final year with Nash. We'd been trying for a baby, and after months of disappointment, I'd finally gotten pregnant. Then, in my 11th week, I miscarried. Nash had seemed devastated initially, but within days, he'd withdrawn completely. He worked longer hours, came home later, spoke less. 3 months later, he filed for divorce. A month after that, he disappeared from my life entirely. No calls, no emails, nothing. It was as if he'd vanished from the face of the earth. The next day, I drove to visit my mother in her retirement community an hour away. Mom had never liked Nash, calling him slippery as an eel behind his back. She'd been thrilled when Rowan and I got together, describing him as solid ground after quicksand. "Mom," I said carefully as we sat on her porch with iced tea, "you'll never guess who I ran into at the grocery store." "Nash." The change in her expression was subtle but unmistakable, a tightening around the eyes, a slight pursing of her lips. "Nash Kingsley? Here in Vermont? That's unexpected." "You don't seem surprised," she sighed, setting down her glass. "There's something I never told you, Alara. After your divorce, Nash came to see me." My heart skipped.
He what?
"Why?" "He said he was leaving, going somewhere far away, and that I should keep an eye on you. He said if anything strange ever happened, I should protect you." She looked uncomfortable. I thought he was being dramatic, maybe even trying to manipulate me into speaking well of him to you. But he seemed frightened. That night, I dreamed of Nash. In the dream, he stood at the foot of my bed, whispering, "Trust no one," while Rowan slept peacefully beside me, unaware. I woke with a start, my heart pounding. Reaching for my phone, I messaged Corinne, a mutual friend from college who had introduced Nash and me all those years ago. "Hey, random question. Do you remember Nash ever saying anything strange before he disappeared? Anything about being in danger, or knowing something he shouldn't?" Her reply came hours later. "Weird you should ask. The last time I saw him, he was acting paranoid. Said something like, if something happens to me, it's because I knew too much." I figured it was the alcohol talking.
"Why?
"Have you heard from him?" I stared at her message for a long time, a cold knot forming in my stomach. What had Nash known? And what did it have to do with Rowan? My suspicion grew like a shadow at sunset, stretching longer with each passing day. The more I thought about Nash's warning, the more I scrutinized Rowan's life, or rather, the conspicuous absence of evidence of his life before me. He claimed to have grown up in Seattle, but never mentioned specific neighborhoods or schools. He said he'd moved around a lot for work, consulting for various logistics firms, but never named any. When pressed for details, he changed the subject with practiced ease. One morning after Rowan left for a rare in-person meeting, I sat at our kitchen table with a notepad, trying to list everything I concretely knew about my husband's past. The page remained almost blank. I opened my laptop and searched for information about his supposed previous employer, Sullivan Logistics. The company existed, but when I called their HR department pretending to verify employment for a rental application, they had no record of a Rowan Quinn ever working there. That afternoon, while Rowan was in the shower, I slipped into his home office. He kept it neat to the point of sterility. No personal photos, no mementos, nothing that might offer a glimpse into his past. His desk held a locked drawer that I'd never seen opened. The shower was still running. Heart pounding, I retrieved a hairpin from my room and, thanks to a misspent youth and a lock-picking boyfriend in college, managed to jimmy it open. Inside was a manila folder containing several documents, bank statements, property records for our house, and beneath them, a faded photograph. It showed a younger Rowan, maybe in his late 20s, standing next to another man I didn't recognize. They wore dark suits and stern expressions. On the back, written in faded blue ink, Caleb Voss and Michael Reeves, Chicago, 2012. Caleb Voss? Who was Caleb Voss? The shower turned off. I quickly replaced everything, locked the drawer, and slipped out of the office. That evening, as Rowan and I ate dinner, I studied his face, trying to reconcile the man across from me with the stranger in the photograph. Who was he really? And why had he changed his name? "You're staring," he said, looking up from his pasta. "Do I have sauce on my face?" I forced a laugh, just admiring the view. He smiled, but something in his eyes made me wonder if he believed me. The next day, I visited a private investigator's office in Burlington, an hour's drive from our town. The woman behind the desk introduced herself as Jillian Monroe, a former police detective with 20 years of experience. "What can I help you with, Mrs. Quinn?" she asked after I'd signed her confidentiality agreement. I hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish. What was I doing here? Investigating my own husband based on a cryptic text from my ex? But the image of Nash's terrified face propelled me forward. "I need a background check on someone," I said, sliding a piece of paper across her desk. On it, I'd written, "Rowan Quinn, DOB April 17th, 1984, claimed, possibly also used name, Caleb Voss, last known location before Vermont, Chicago, approximate 2014. Jillian raised an eyebrow but didn't comment on the fact that I was investigating my own husband. Instead, she quoted her fee and promised to call me within 48 hours. As I drove home, an unsettling thought occurred to me. What if Rowan somehow found out I was investigating him? The idea made my hands shake on the steering wheel. Over the next 2 days, Rowan's behavior shifted subtly. He canceled a dinner with friends at the last minute, claiming a work emergency. He started locking the door to his office when he left, something he'd never done before. Twice, I caught him watching me with an unreadable expression. Or was I just being paranoid? Was I seeing threats where none existed because Nash had planted the idea in my head? On Wednesday afternoon, as I was closing up the cafe, my phone rang. "Jillian. Mrs. Quinn, I have some preliminary findings. Can you come to my office tomorrow? Can't you tell me over the phone?" A pause. "I think it's better if we meet in person." The next morning, I told Rowan I needed to visit a new supplier in Burlington. He offered to come along, but I declined, saying it would be boring business talk. Was it my imagination, or did his eyes narrow slightly before he nodded? Jillian's office was as no-nonsense as she was. She closed the door behind me and went straight to the point. "Rowan Quinn doesn't exist before 2014, she said, sliding a folder across her desk. "No birth certificate, no school records, no employment history, no tax returns, nothing. It's as if he materialized out of thin air 11 years ago." My mouth went dry. "That's impossible. Everyone leaves a paper trail." "Everyone real does," she agreed. "But Rowan Quinn isn't real. At least, not before 2014. I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were various database search results, all coming up empty for Rowan Quinn before a certain date. "What about Caleb Voss?" I asked. Jillian's expression was grim. "That's where things get interesting." She pulled up a file on her computer and turned the screen toward me. Caleb Voss was a federal witness in a major corporate espionage case involving Biogen Industries in Chicago in 2013 to 2014. After his testimony, he disappeared. Entered witness protection, most likely. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear her next words. The case involved allegations of illegal bioweapon research and several suspicious deaths, including a tech whistleblower named Simon Kingsley. The room seemed to tilt. Kingsley? I repeated. As in, I don't know if there's a connection to your ex-husband, Jillian said carefully. But the timing matches. Simon Kingsley disappeared in early 2014, the same year your ex-husband filed for divorce. I felt sick. Nash had never mentioned a brother named Simon, but he'd been so secretive about his family that it wouldn't surprise me if he'd hidden siblings. There's more, Jillian continued. The photo you mentioned of Caleb Voss? I found a match in a court database. She showed me a grainy image on her screen. Undeniably Rowan, or rather Caleb, entering a courthouse with federal marshals. I left Jillian's office with more questions than answers, and a growing sense of dread. If Rowan was really Caleb Voss, who was in witness protection, why had he married me? Was it coincidence? Or was there some connection to Nash that I didn't understand? That evening, I confronted Rowan as gently as I could. I found an old photo in your desk, I said casually as we prepared dinner. You looked younger. The name on the back said Caleb Voss. Is that you? His hand stilled for just a moment before he continued chopping vegetables. I wondered if you'd find that eventually, he said, his voice even. Yes, that was my name before. You changed it? Why? He sighed, setting down the knife. I had a toxic relationship that ended badly. She became obsessive, stalked me. Changing my name was the cleanest break. He looked at me directly. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. It's not something I'm proud of. His explanation sounded reasonable, even sympathetic. But something in his eyes, a calculation, a watchfulness, made me doubt every word. I nodded as if I understood, as if I believed him. That must have been difficult, I said, touching his arm lightly. He covered my hand with his, smiling warmly. It was. But it led me to you, so I can't regret it. I smiled back, feeling hollow inside. Because now I knew, Rowan Quinn, the man I'd married, the man I'd built a life with, was a fabrication. A ghost.
A lie.
And somewhere out there, Nash Kingsley was afraid for my life. I needed to find him. I needed the truth. The next day, I drove to the last address I had for Nash from our divorce papers, an apartment in Burlington he'd rented briefly before disappearing. The building manager didn't remember him, but an elderly neighbor perked up at his name. Kingsley, quiet fellow, kept to himself, said the strangest thing when he left. The old man leaned closer, said he was watching someone dangerous. Thought he was a bit touched in the head, if you know what I mean. My blood ran cold. Did he say who he was watching? The man shook his head. Just that it was someone who wasn't who they seemed. In the apartment building's lobby, I noticed a wall of old mailboxes. On a hunch, I checked the label for Nash's old unit. The name had been replaced, but underneath, barely visible, someone had scratched an email address into the metal, and kinged a watchingvoss@protonmail.com. When I got home, I sent a message to the address. Nash, it's Alara. I need to know what's going on. Who is Caleb Voss? Why did you tell me to run? Less than 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number. Don't say my name. Nash's voice came through, tense and hushed. Don't tell him you're talking to me. I won't. I promised, my heart racing. Tell me what's happening. Your husband isn't Rowan Quinn, he said flatly. He's Caleb Voss. He was part of the operation that silenced my brother Simon. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. Silence. Simon discovered Biogen was developing weaponized pathogens for private military contractors. He had proof was going to go public. Then he vanished. Nash's voice cracked. I started investigating. Got too close. Voss was sent to deal with me. Deal with you how? I was supposed to have an accident, but something went wrong with their timeline. I got away, went underground. I've been tracking him ever since, waiting for him to make a mistake. A pause. I never thought that mistake would be marrying you. My mind reeled. But why me? Was it just coincidence? Nash's bitter laugh sent chills down my spine. There are no coincidences with people like Voss. You were my wife. My weakness. They probably figured if I ever resurfaced, I'd contact you. I thought about Rowan, Caleb, his quiet demeanor, his careful avoidance of cameras, his insistence on privacy. You think he's quiet because he's gentle, Nash said, as if reading my thoughts. No, he's quiet because he's trained. Because silence is necessary for what he does. Which is what, exactly? I whispered. He eliminates problems, Nash said flatly. And right now, Ilara, you're becoming a problem. After we hung up, I sat in my car, trying to process everything Nash had told me. My husband, the man I'd shared a bed with for 3 years, the man I'd built a life with, was possibly involved in the disappearance of my ex-husband's brother. Was possibly monitoring me to get to Nash. Was possibly what? A killer? It seemed too fantastic, too much like the plot of a thriller novel. And yet, the evidence was mounting. The fake background, the changed name, the connection to a federal case involving Biogen Industries. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside Rowan, listening to his even breathing, wondering what secrets lay behind his closed eyes. Was he really asleep, or was he just pretending, as aware of my wakefulness as I was of his presence? In the morning, I waited until he left for a meeting before returning to his office. This time, I was looking for something specific, proof of who he really was, of what he'd done. I searched methodically, checking every drawer, every book, every potential hiding place. Nothing. I was about to give up when I noticed a slight unevenness in the hardwood floor beneath his desk, a loose floorboard, carefully concealed. Using a letter opener, I pried it up. Inside the small cavity was a USB drive. My hands shook as I plugged it into my laptop. Most of the files were encrypted, but several opened, scanned IDs for both Rowan Quinn and Caleb Voss, financial records, and a folder labeled Operation Lucid Sky. Inside that folder was a document titled Terminated Assets. I scrolled through it, my horror growing with each name. Near the bottom, Simon Kingsley, status. Neutralized, March 2014. Beneath the document were surveillance photos, various individuals photographed without their knowledge. The final image made my blood freeze. Me, walking into my cafe, taken just 2 months ago. The file name, Kingsley Connection. Ongoing surveillance. I heard the front door open. Rowan wasn't supposed to be home for hours. Quickly, I removed the USB, replaced the floorboard, and shut down my laptop. I was just slipping out of his office when his voice came from behind me. Looking for something? I turned, forcing a smile. Just cleaning. You know how I get when I'm stressed about the cafe. He studied me, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Of course. That night, I pretended to sleep while watching through barely open eyes as Rowan rose from bed around 2 a.m. He moved silently to his office, closing the door behind him. When he emerged 20 minutes later, his face was set in grim lines. He went to the hidden drawer I'd opened days before, unlocking it with a key from around his neck. When he found it empty, I'd removed the photo. He froze. Slowly, he turned and looked toward our bedroom, as if he could see through walls to where I lay pretending to sleep. In that moment I knew, Nash was right. I needed to run. The morning light felt like a mockery as I moved through our kitchen, preparing coffee with trembling hands. Rowan, no, Caleb sat at the island counter, reading news on his tablet. How could he look so normal, so mundane, when my entire world had been shattered? Sleep well? He asked, not looking up. Fine. I lied, setting his mug in front of him. My mind raced with what I knew. The USB drive hidden under the floorboard, the document listing Simon Kingsley as neutralized, the surveillance photos of me. Caleb's fingers brushed mine as he took the mug. You sure? You were restless last night. So he had been watching me. Just stressed about the cafe, I said, the excuse feeling worn thin. He nodded, seemingly satisfied, but I felt his eyes on me as I turned away. I needed to contact Nash again to figure out what to do next. But I couldn't use my phone. If Caleb was who Nash claimed he was, he might be monitoring it. "I'm heading to the cafe early today," I announced, gathering my things. New seasonal menu planning. Caleb's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Need help?" "No, I've got it covered." I kissed his cheek, a performance that made my skin crawl. "See you tonight." Once safely in my car, I drove not to the cafe, but back to Nash's old apartment building in Burlington. The elderly neighbor, who had recognized Nash's name, was watering plants in the lobby. "Hello again," he said, brightening. "Did you find your friend?" "Not yet," I admitted. "But I'm hoping to." "Did he ever mention where he might go if he needed to hide?" The man frowned thoughtfully. "Not specifically. But he did say something about watching the river. Said it was a good place to think, to plan." The Burlington waterfront stretched along Lake Champlain, with walking paths and benches offering views of the water. I spent the next hour walking its length, scanning faces, hoping for a glimpse of Nash. Instead, I found something else, a bench with fresh graffiti scratched into the wood. "Ike, Dockside Motel, Room 12. Delete this after reading." My heart pounded. Ike, Alara Kingsley, my married name with Nash. He was reaching out. The Dockside Motel was a rundown establishment at the far end of the waterfront, the kind of place that charged by the hour and didn't ask questions. I knocked on the door of room 12, my entire body tense. Nash opened it a crack, then pulled me inside quickly, checking the parking lot before locking and chaining the door. He looked worse than he had at the grocery store, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes and a new scar along his jawline. The room was Spartan except for a laptop and stacks of files. "You shouldn't have come in your car," he said without preamble. He could be tracking it. "I didn't know how else to find you." I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. "I found things, a USB drive. Documents mentioning your brother." Nash's expression hardened. "What did they say?" "That he was neutralized in 2014. Part of something called Operation Lucid Sky." I watched his face crumple momentarily before his features reset into determined lines. "I need that USB," he said. "It could have the proof I've been looking for." I couldn't take it. He would have noticed. Nash paced the small room. "We need to copy it then. And we need to do it soon. If you've been searching his things, he already suspects something's wrong." "Tell me everything," I demanded. "I need to understand what I'm dealing with." Nash sat heavily in the room's only chair. "After Simon disappeared, I started investigating. I was still with you then, but I couldn't tell you. I was trying to protect you." He ran a hand through his hair. Simon had been working for Biogen Industries on what he thought was vaccine research. Then he discovered they were actually developing bioweapons for private contractors, modifications to existing viruses that could target specific genetic markers. "That sounds like science fiction," I protested. "I wish it was." Nash's expression was grim. "Simon collected evidence, planned to go public. Then he vanished. When I started asking questions, they sent someone to watch me, Caleb Voss." "Rowan," I whispered. "He's not just a witness in protection, Alara. He was one of them. A handler, possibly an operative. When I got too close to the truth, he was assigned to eliminate me, but I got tipped off and disappeared. Then why come after me? Why marry me?" "Control," Nash said simply. "As long as he had you, he knew I wouldn't risk exposing them. You were insurance." The realization hit me like a physical blow. Our entire marriage was a lie. "I'm sorry." Nash's voice softened. "But we need to focus on what's happening now. I need to access that USB, and you need to get away from him before he realizes how much you know." We formed a plan. I would copy the USB contents the next day, while Caleb was at a scheduled meeting. Nash gave me a secure email address to send the files to. Then I would book a hotel room under a fake name and wait for Nash to contact me. "Don't act any differently around him," Nash warned as I prepared to leave. "People like Voss are hyper-aware of behavioral changes." As I turned to go, Nash caught my arm. "Alara, I never told you the whole truth about why I left." His eyes were pained. After the miscarriage, I learned they might have targeted our baby because of what I was investigating. I couldn't risk you becoming collateral damage again. I pulled away, too overwhelmed to process this new information. I need to go. That night, I performed the role of unsuspecting wife with a desperation born of fear. I smiled at Caleb's jokes, discussed cafe business, and pretended everything was normal while my heart thundered in my chest. When he reached for me in bed, I fought the urge to recoil and responded with what I hoped was convincing passion. Afterward, as he slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and thought about how well he'd played his part, the supportive husband, the gentle lover. How many others had he deceived? How many had he neutralized? The next morning, I waited until Caleb left for his meeting before racing to his office. The USB was still there, hidden beneath the floorboard. I copied its contents, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it twice. Most files were encrypted, but I sent everything to Nash's secure email. I was just replacing the USB when my phone buzzed with a text from Jillian, the private investigator. Found something critical about Voss. Need to meet ASAP. I responded immediately. For PM, Burlington Public Library. Then I packed a small overnight bag, hiding it in my car's trunk. I booked a room at the Hillcrest Inn outside of town under the name Laura Palmer, a Twin Peaks reference Nash would recognize if he needed to find me. Jillian was waiting in a quiet corner of the library's reference section, a manila folder in her hands. Her usual professional composure seemed shaken. "Mrs. Quinn," she said softly, "what you've gotten yourself involved in, it's more dangerous than I initially thought." She opened the folder to reveal printouts of email correspondence and what looked like internal memos. "I have a contact at the FBI who owed me a favor," she explained. "These are redacted files from the Biogen case. Caleb Voss wasn't just a witness. He was an asset, a government operative embedded in the company." I scanned the documents, my confusion growing. But Nash said, "Your ex-husband doesn't have the full picture," Jillian interrupted. "Simon Kingsley wasn't just a whistleblower. According to these files, he was attempting to sell classified research to foreign interests." "That doesn't make sense," I protested. "Why would Nash lie about that?" Jillian's expression was grave. "Maybe he didn't know. Or maybe he's not being entirely truthful with you." As I drove back to town, my mind was a tangle of contradictions. Was Nash wrong about Caleb? Was Caleb actually some kind of government agent? But that didn't explain the surveillance photos of me, or why he'd hidden his identity for so long. I decided to stop by the cafe to maintain appearances, but as I walked through the door, I knew something was wrong. The usual afternoon customers were absent, and my assistant manager looked nervous. "Your husband called," she said. "Asked if you'd been in today." I told him you hadn't. My blood ran cold. Caleb knew I'd lied about where I was going. I made an excuse about a supplier emergency and left quickly, my heart pounding. As I approached my car, I noticed a small blinking light underneath, a tracking device. Had it been there all along? Using my phone felt too risky, so I drove to a nearby electronics store and bought a prepaid cell phone with cash. From the parking lot, I called Nash. "He knows something's wrong," I said without preamble. "There's a tracker on my car." "Ditch it now," Nash ordered. "Take a taxi to the motel. I've found something on the files you sent, audio recordings. One of them has Voss clearly saying, 'Take out Kingsley if he gets close.' I'm going to the hotel I booked," I told him. "Under Laura Palmer." "Smart. I'll send the audio file to a contact at the Washington Post. We're going public tonight. You need to disappear until this blows over." I abandoned my car in the electronics store parking lot and caught a taxi to the Hillcrest Inn. As I checked in, the woman at the front desk gave me a curious look, but didn't comment on my lack of luggage. In my room, I paced anxiously, jumping at every sound from the hallway. Nash texted the burner phone. "We have what we need. I'm going public. You need to disappear. Tonight." I texted back. "Be careful. Call when it's safe." Hours passed with no further word from Nash. Night fell. I tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Had something happened? Had Caleb found him? Around 9 p.m., I heard a car pull up outside my room. Through a gap in the curtains, I saw a familiar sedan, our car. Caleb's car. My heart stopped.
How had he found me?
I grabbed my purse and headed for the bathroom window. But before I could reach it, I heard the key card in the door. Of course, he'd have charmed the receptionist into giving him access to his wife's room. The door swung open. Caleb stood there, his expression unnervingly calm. "You left your overnight bag in the trunk," he said conversationally, holding it up. "Rookie mistake." "How did you find me?" I asked, backing away as Caleb entered the room and closed the door behind him. "You think I haven't prepared for this possibility?" He set my bag down carefully. "There's a tracker in your purse, in your coat lining in your car. I've been monitoring your phone since the day you saw Nash at the grocery store." I thought of the knife I'd stashed under the bathroom sink when I'd first checked in, a precaution that now seemed laughably inadequate.
Why?
I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why all of this? Why me?" Caleb, because I could no longer think of him as Rowan, sighed and sat on the edge of the bed. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. You were never supposed to know." "Know what? That my entire marriage was a surveillance operation? That you married me to monitor Nash?" "Initially, yes," he admitted, and the casual confirmation felt like a physical blow. "When Nash disappeared after getting too close to the biogen operation, my assignment was to maintain proximity to you in case he made contact." "So our meeting at that gallery opening was staged? Our entire relationship was fake." His expression flickered. "The meeting was arranged. What came after wasn't entirely professional. You expect me to believe you developed feelings for me while spying on me?" I laughed bitterly. "While keeping me in the dark about your involvement in Nash's brother's death?" "Simon Kingsley wasn't killed," Caleb said sharply. "He's in witness protection." The neutralized designation in the files meant his threat to national security was contained. I stared at him. "Why should I believe anything you say?" "Because I'm not the only one lying to you, Alara." He pulled out his phone and played an audio recording, Nash's voice. "The Kingsley woman is still useful. Keep her in play until we secure the remaining samples." My blood ran cold. That could be about anyone. It could be fake. "It's from 3 weeks ago," Caleb said. "A conversation between Nash and a known arms dealer named Victor Drayton." "So, you're claiming Nash is what? A bioweapons dealer?" "I'm saying the situation is more complicated than he's led you to believe." Caleb's expression softened slightly. "Nash isn't the victim here. He and Simon were working together, selling classified research to private military contractors. When Simon got cold feet, Nash eliminated him and tried to take everything for himself." "No." I shook my head vehemently. "Nash loved his brother. He's been trying to expose what happened to him for years." "He's been trying to recover the research for years," Caleb corrected. "And he's been using you to do it." My head was spinning. "I don't believe you." "Believe what you want. But ask yourself, why did Nash suddenly reappear after 10 years? Why did he warn you about me only after seeing me with you? If he was so concerned for your safety, why didn't he warn you years ago?" The questions hit uncomfortably close to doubts I'd been suppressing. Nash's timing had been suspicious. And how had he known where to find me in Vermont, unless he'd been keeping tabs on me too? "If you're telling the truth," I said slowly, "then prove it. Show me real evidence, not convenient audio clips that could be manipulated." "I can do better than that," Caleb replied. "I can take you to Simon Kingsley." I stared at him. "What?" "He's in a safe house outside Burlington. I can take you there right now." It could be a trap. But if there was any chance that Simon was alive, that I could get answers directly from him. "Fine," I agreed. "But I'm driving my own car and following you. And I'm calling Jillian to let her know where I'm going." Caleb hesitated, then nodded. "Fair enough." I made the call to Jillian, watching Caleb closely as I explained where I was going. When I mentioned Simon Kingsley being alive, she gasped audibly. "Be careful," she warned. "Nothing about this situation is what it seems." I followed Caleb's car along dark country roads, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. My mind raced with possibilities. Was Simon really alive? Was Nash the villain in this story? Had I been a pawn for both men all along? After nearly an hour, we turned onto a private drive leading to a modest farmhouse set back from the road. As we approached, I saw security cameras mounted discreetly in the trees. Caleb parked and waited for me, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "Whatever happens in there," he said quietly, "remember that I did care for you, Alara." That wasn't a lie. Inside, a man waited in a sparsely furnished living room. He had Nash's build and coloring, but was thinner, with a neat beard and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked nothing like the surveillance photos Nash had shown me of his supposedly deceased brother. "You must be Alara," he said, extending his hand.
I'm Simon Kingsley.
My legs nearly gave out. "You're alive." "No thanks to my brother," Simon said grimly. "Has Caleb told you what really happened?" Over the next hour, Simon laid out a story so different from Nash's version that it seemed impossible they were describing the same events. According to Simon, he and Nash had been working together to sell bioweapon research to private bidders when Simon had second thoughts and tried to back out. Nash had threatened him, and Simon had gone to federal authorities for protection. Nash disappeared because he was running from the FBI, not because he was in danger, Simon explained. He's been trying to recover the research ever since, to complete the sale. "Why would he contact me now?" I asked, still struggling to reconcile this version with what Nash had told me. "Because of what Caleb has," Simon said, nodding toward my husband. "The complete research files. Nash must have realized who Caleb really was when he saw you together. He knew this was his chance to finally get what he's been after." I turned to Caleb. "And what exactly is your role in all this?" "Counterintelligence," he admitted. "I was assigned to infiltrate Biogen, monitor the Kingsley brothers, and secure the research. When Nash disappeared, staying close to you became my mission." "And marrying me?" I asked bitterly. "Was that part of the mission too?" Something flickered in his eyes. "That was a complication." Simon cleared his throat. "The point is, Nash is dangerous. If he's reached out to you, it's because he wants to use you to get to Caleb and the research he's protecting." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Nash's number. "Don't trust them. I have proof. Meet me at the cafe at midnight." I showed it to Caleb, who exchanged a look with Simon. "It's a trap," Caleb said firmly. "He knows we've told you the truth, and he's desperate. Or you're lying, and he's the one with proof," I countered. "Think about it, Alara," Simon urged. "Why would he want to meet at your cafe? A place with multiple exits that you have keys to, where you could let him in the back while authorities are watching the front." The logic made sense, but I still wasn't convinced. "I need time to think," I said. "This is too much." Caleb nodded. "Stay here tonight. It's secure. We can figure out next steps in the morning." I agreed, not because I trusted them, but because I needed space to sort through the contradicting narratives. Simon showed me to his spare bedroom, while Caleb made some calls. Once alone, I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind reeling. Both stories had elements that rang true, and both had inconsistencies. Nash's reappearance after a decade was suspicious, but so was Caleb's elaborate deception. I remembered something my mother once said about Nash. That man could sell ice to Eskimos. His charm makes you forget to ask the important questions. But wasn't that true of Caleb as well? Hadn't he charmed his way into my life, my bed, my heart? Around 11:30 p.m., I made my decision. While Caleb and Simon were talking in the kitchen, I slipped out the bedroom window and took Simon's car, the keys to which I'd pocketed earlier when he'd set them down. I had to know the truth, and the only way to get it was to confront Nash directly. But I wasn't going to the cafe. Instead, I drove to Jillian's office. She'd been the only constant, the only person who'd provided verifiable information. The office was dark when I arrived, but Jillian's car was in the lot. I knocked on the door, and after a moment, she opened it, looking unsurprised to see me. "I figured you'd come," she said, ushering me inside. "Did you meet Simon Kingsley?"
Yes.
"He told me Nash is the villain in all this. That he's been trying to sell bioweapons research." Jillian nodded grimly. "That matches what my FBI contact told me. But there's more." She hesitated. I received this an hour ago. She handed me a sealed envelope. It was delivered by courier. For your eyes only, apparently. Inside was a single sheet of paper with what looked like code and a note. The encryption key for the USB.
N.
Nash sent this. I asked. So it seems. Do you have the USB files? I nodded. I'd emailed them to myself, as well as to Nash. Jillian pulled up the files on her computer, and we entered the decryption key. The files unlocked, revealing documents, photos, and audio recordings, all pointing to a massive conspiracy involving Biogen, private military contractors, and government officials. And there, in a series of photos, was Caleb, meeting with known arms dealers, exchanging packages with shadowy figures, standing over what appeared to be a body. Oh my God, I whispered. He's not counterintelligence, Jillian said softly. He's a cleaner. He eliminates problems for whoever pays the most. As the implications sank in, the lights went out. A moment later, we heard the front door being forced open. He found us, Jillian hissed, pulling me toward a back exit. We need to go now. But before we could reach it, the door burst open. Caleb stood there, his expression cold and unfamiliar. That's far enough, he said quietly. You're becoming a problem, Ilara. And you know what I do with problems. Behind him stood Simon, holding a gun. I'm sorry it came to this, Caleb continued, his voice almost gentle. I never wanted to hurt you, but I will if I have to. I nodded silently, tears running down my cheeks, and reached slowly under the desk where I'd seen Jillian tape a knife earlier that day. Before I could grasp it, the room plunged into total darkness. Sirens wailed outside. Flashlight beams swept through the windows as voices shouted, FBI. Freeze. The back door crashed open, and in the chaos of shouting and flashlights, I made out a familiar figure. Nash, alive and accompanied by federal agents. Don't move, Voss, an agent ordered as Caleb was forced to the ground. Simon tried to flee, but was tackled by another agent. And just like that, it was over. The federal building in Burlington was cold and sterile, its interrogation room even more so. I sat across from Agent Daniel Foster, a grim-faced man who'd been questioning me for hours. Let me get this straight, he said, reviewing his notes. You had no idea your husband was Caleb Voss until your ex-husband warned you. That's correct. I confirmed for what felt like the 100th time. I thought he was Rowan Quinn, a logistics consultant. And when did you realize the truth about his activities? Not until tonight, I admitted. I knew he'd changed his identity, but I believed his explanation about witness protection. Agent Foster nodded, making another note. Mr. Kingsley, Nash Kingsley, has been working with us for the past 18 months. He approached the Bureau after discovering evidence that his brother hadn't merely disappeared but had been killed, despite official reports. I frowned. But Simon is alive. I saw him tonight. The man you met was not Simon Kingsley, Foster said grimly. Facial recognition confirms he's Marcus Webb, a former Biogen employee who's been working with Voss. The real Simon Kingsley's remains were recovered from a lake in Wisconsin 3 months ago. My head spun. So Nash was telling the truth? Simon was killed.
Yes.
And Caleb Voss, your husband, was responsible. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Everything Caleb and the fake Simon had told me was a lie, crafted to make me doubt Nash and maintain Caleb's cover. What about Jillian? I asked. The private investigator I hired? In custody, Foster confirmed. She's been working with Voss for years. The documents she showed you were forgeries. Outside the interrogation room, Nash waited, looking haggard but relieved. When I emerged, he stood awkwardly, unsure of my reaction. You were right, I said simply. About everything. He nodded, his expression solemn. I wish I hadn't been. In the following days, the full truth emerged. Caleb Voss had indeed been a government operative initially, but he'd gone rogue years ago, selling his skills to the highest bidder. He'd been hired by Biogen to eliminate Simon Kingsley after Simon discovered their illegal weapons research. When Nash started investigating his brother's disappearance, Caleb was assigned to neutralize him as well. But Nash had gone underground before Caleb could complete the job. Why did he marry me? I asked Nash as we sat in a small cafe near the federal building, both of us running on coffee and adrenaline after another day of debriefings. Control, Nash said simply. And insurance. As long as he had you, he knew I wouldn't risk coming forward without solid proof. You were his protection. For 3 years, I whispered, the reality of it still incomprehensible. I shared a bed with the man who killed your brother. Nash reached across the table, his hand covering mine briefly. You couldn't have known. He's a professional manipulator. But you knew. You tried to warn me. Not soon enough, he said grimly. I only realized who he was when I saw him with you at the grocery store. I'd been tracking him for months, but I'd never seen his face clearly. When I did,
He shook his head.
I couldn't believe it. Of all the people in the world, he'd married you. In the weeks that followed, I was moved to a safe house outside of town. Caleb, who refused to answer to any name but Rowan during his interrogations, provided information on his other operations in exchange for consideration during sentencing. Nash stayed in Burlington, working with the FBI to unravel the extent of the Biogen conspiracy. We saw each other occasionally during joint debriefings, our shared trauma creating a strange bond between us. What happens now? I asked him one evening as we walked along the waterfront, federal agents discreetly trailing us.
Voss will go to prison, he said.
The Biogen executives, too. As for us, he shrugged. Witness protection, probably. New identities, new locations. Separate locations, I clarified, needing to establish that boundary. Nash nodded, understanding in his eyes. Of course, we're not the same people we were 10 years ago. No, I agreed softly. We're not. The trauma specialist I was assigned described my marriage to Caleb as intimate terrorism, a profound violation not just of trust, but of basic human dignity. I spent hours in her office, trying to reconcile the man I thought I'd married with the monster revealed in court documents and testimony. How do I ever trust my judgment again? I asked Dr. Laurel Winters during one particularly difficult session. I thought I knew him. You knew the person he pretended to be, she replied gently. That persona was meticulously crafted to appeal to you, to seem trustworthy and genuine. But I lived with him for 3 years, I protested. How did I not see through it? Because you weren't looking for deception on that scale, she explained. Most people don't. 6 months after Caleb's arrest, I was allowed to return briefly to our home to collect personal belongings before it was sold as part of the asset forfeiture. Nash accompanied me, along with 2 agents. The house felt smaller, emptier. In the cold light of my new reality, the cozy spaces we'd shared seemed staged, like a movie set rather than a home. In the bedroom, I packed clothes and jewelry, leaving behind anything Caleb had given me. In my studio, I gathered sketchbooks and supplies, the only part of my life that had been genuinely mine. Nash waited in the living room, respectful of my need to process this alone. When I emerged with my suitcases, he asked, "Did you get everything you need?" Almost. There was one more thing I needed to do. In the kitchen, I found what I was looking for, the wooden box where we'd kept mementos. Inside was my wedding ring, which I'd removed the day of Caleb's arrest. I placed it in an envelope. I need to see him, I told Nash. One last time. He looked concerned but nodded. I understand. 2 days later, I sat across from Caleb in a prison visiting room, a glass partition between us. He looked thinner, his eyes harder, but when he saw me, something flickered in his expression. Regret, perhaps, or just surprise. "Ilara," he said, his voice crackling through the intercom. "I didn't think you'd come." "I needed to," I replied, studying the face I'd once believed I knew intimately. "I need to understand." "What do you want me to say?" he asked. "That it was all fake?" "It wasn't. Not entirely. But enough of it was," I countered. "Enough that you could have killed me if necessary." He didn't deny it. The mission always came first. That's how I was trained. "And us? Was that part of your training too?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips.
No.
That was unexpected. But not enough to change anything, I noted. We are who we are, Alara. I couldn't be what you wanted me to be. I nodded, accepting this fundamental truth. Then I slid the envelope across the counter to the guard, who inspected it and passed it to Caleb. He opened it, staring at the ring inside. "Goodbye, Caleb," I said, standing. "I did love you," he called as I turned to leave. "In my way." I paused but didn't look back. Your way wasn't enough. A month later, I reopened the cafe with a new name, Fractured Light, and a gallery featuring artwork from trauma survivors. I hired security personnel, installed cameras, and adopted a retired police dog named Sentinel who slept by the counter. Nash stopped by on the opening day. He'd been cleared to begin his new life in witness protection and had come to say goodbye. "You could come too," he offered. "Start fresh somewhere else." I shook my head, looking around at the space I'd created. "I'm done running. Done hiding. This is my life, and I'm taking it back." He nodded, understanding. "You always were the stronger one." We embraced briefly, awkwardly, two survivors of the same nightmare, bound by shared trauma but separated by too much history to ever truly reconnect. "Be safe," I told him. "Be happy." "You too," he replied, and then he was gone. One afternoon a week later, I found a sealed envelope on my doorstep when I returned home from the cafe. No postmark, no return address. Inside was a ring, my wedding ring from Caleb, and a note in his distinctive handwriting. "You are the only truth." I stood on my porch, staring at the familiar platinum band that had once symbolized so much. Then I walked to my fireplace, crumpled the note, and set it ablaze. The ring I dropped into the flames as well, watching as the metal began to glow. As I turned away from the fire, my phone chimed with a text from a new number. "He escaped custody. Be careful."
And
I froze, my heart racing. Then, deliberately, I deleted the message, activated my new security system, and checked that Sentinel was at his post by the door. I wouldn't run. Not this time. Not ever again. Whatever came next, I would face it on my terms, in my space, with my eyes wide open. I had survived Caleb Voss once. I could do it again, if necessary. The woman who had married him no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, warier, wiser. Someone who knew that sometimes the most dangerous monsters wore the faces of those we loved. And someone who would never, ever be fooled again. Give me outro for the story. A very short one. Just 1 or 2 lines that should start with a question for the audience. A difficult and introspecting one, and call to action such as liking and subscribing for more stories.